So first things first, I am wiping away with a wet washcloth any skincare I've already done. I know this is a little unusual, but I personally like to have like dry skin underneath my brows with no product because it makes the product adhere better. I don't always do this and I don't think it's completely necessary, but for the absolute best results, it helps a lot. And then I'm taking my fattest spoolie to just lay and slick my hairs up and outward at a diagonal. If you don't stick them up and out and just brush them straight up, you'll have like really strange looking vertical hairs. You don't want to do that. So lay them as flat as you can, up and out at a diagonal in the natural way that they kind of flow when your brows are looking nice and perfect. Then you're gonna lay down any hairs that are too long because, well, that's a personal choice, but I personally cannot stand the spiky, sharp, dangerous looking brows. So I like to lay down any hairs that are a little longer than the shape that I'm going for. Now for the part where I'll actually be adding makeup, I'm gonna take this slim pencil from L'Oreal in the color Soft Black, and with the lightest hand possible, I'm gonna draw the straightest line I can. I'm gonna be totally honest, this really just takes some practice. I don't have many tips other than to just practice to get that straight line in the front. Follow the natural arch of your brow to create the line that's gonna underline your tail. And from there, that's when I'm gonna start filling in any sparse areas, any gaps. I'm not just gonna shade in the whole thing dark. I'm not just gonna color in the entire brow for the sake of coloring it in. No, I'm intentionally looking at any spaces where there's less hair or where it's naturally less dark. And that's where I'm drawing hair-like strokes to kind of fill that in. Think of it as filling in your brows rather than drawing them on. Look for any of those gaps, really study your face, really look at it. I always tell my students art and drawing is a lot more about seeing than it is about actually actively drawing. So the more you practice, the more you're training your eye to see where filling gaps is needed and to see when your line isn't as straight as it can be. And we're gonna practice some seeing in a moment. For the second step, you're just gonna be filling in any gaps. Now for my third step, same thing. Instead of underlining it, I'm gonna be lining in on top of the shape of my brow. Notice how I don't overline because I don't want to make my eyebrow any bigger or thicker than it already is. No one talks about this, but just from doing that first step of brushing your hairs up and out, you're already making them look way thicker than they actually naturally look like on a day-to-day basis when you're not doing your brows. So when you do that overline, I'm also kind of doing it in a way where I'm filling in any gaps at the top without the goal of making them look bigger or thicker or wider. I highly encourage you to go with the natural thickness of your brow, and I think it's even best if you go to get them professionally waxed or threaded before filling them in yourself, because then you have an idea of your ideal brow shape to go for. And now your main job is just to fill in the gaps of wherever it's sparse. So those first couple steps are really important because with that underline and that overline, you're going to be defining the shape, and the rest of it should be quite simple of literally just drawing the lightest hair-like strokes in anywhere where you can see a little bit more skin in your brow than other places. I also want to add that yes, I'm emphasizing to fill them in with tiny, very faint, light hair-like strokes, but as you can see, my brows are also naturally extremely light, so I'm not going to use a heavy hand when I'm filling them in. If you have darker brows, you still want to use light hair-like strokes, because just like when we're drawing traditionally, you never want to go in with a heavy hand to add more product. You want to build up product by using a little bit at a time. So say your brows are darker than mine, I'm gonna still use hair-like strokes like you see me doing here, and then add more strokes on top of that, more strokes on top of that, more strokes on top of that, until it gets to the darkness that I need. After those first couple steps of drawing the underline, the overline, and filling it in, then you're seeing me go in with a spoolie to brush out any harsh lines. Those lines that we drew in the beginning were helpful for creating a guideline for the shape that I want, but we don't want to actually see them in the end. A lot of people think that they've achieved their best brow, their perfect brow, when they can see that line that they drew in the beginning. really that line is just a guideline and you don't want to see it in the final product. You can have a clean shape without having that harsh visible line. So go ahead and blend that out with your spoolie. I think it's also important to keep in mind that there is no one single perfect brow shape. There is only your perfect brow shape. So that's why I personally recommend getting them professionally cleaned up before you start filling them in. If you don't like to do that, if you can't do that, if you simply don't want to do that, that is totally fine, and this video should still be helpful. And we're gonna do those guidelines again. I think this brow will be better and easier to follow along if you don't have a freshly waxed or threaded brow, because my brow has plenty of hairs, it's very messy, and I'm still gonna make it look neat and freshly waxed with only using makeup. So I'm going in with that L'Oreal pencil. I'm going to draw the straightest line that I can all the way throughout from the front of the brow to the tail, and part of drawing that line and making it straight actually does involve me filling in some of those empty and sparse areas. So you'll kind of see me doing steps 1 and 2 at the same time, but essentially the goal is to draw the underline and then fill in any sparse areas. Some people like to draw the underline and then the overline and then fill in the sparse areas. I personally don't think it makes a huge difference, just whatever comes naturally for you. Now keep in mind that when you're filling them in, you also want it to be a little lighter towards the front of your brow, the part closest to your nose. But I personally don't like when the ombre is so harsh and so forced to the point where it looks unnatural. I think it's a pretty look actually, that 2016 brow look, but it's not the look that we're going for, because if you're trying to achieve a natural brow, you want that ombre to be present so they don't look boxy, but you don't want it to be super harsh and super forced to where it's like black towards the tail and then like no product towards the front. Also, let's take a moment to pause, rewind. What I did just now in this clip was exactly what I was talking about earlier, which is using your artistic eye to better understand how to achieve the shape that you have in your mind and execute it. Because what did I say? Art is a lot more about seeing than it is about actively drawing. So let's pause right here. To exercise that muscle and to train your artistic eye, just seeing where my brow is right here, right now at this state, what would you change about it? It's not done, but what exactly do you think it needs, knowing that I've now done the underline part and I've filled in some of the sparse areas. One of them is something I've talked about before, where you want to see the underline well enough that it's defining a clear and crisp shape. The other one is something I haven't talked about yet, which is the parallelness between the bottom and top line. Even though I haven't drawn the top line yet, what you can see is that right here in the arch, it's getting really thick. And if you look very closely, it's getting really thin and the lines look like they're about to intersect the more towards the nose you go. That is not what I want at all. This is an extremely common mistake that I see even professionals make that no one talks about. To really achieve that perfect, nice, professionally artistic brow, what you want to focus on is the top line and the bottom line being parallel. Yes, I haven't drawn that top line yet, but what you see me do right here is go back and actually lower that bottom line so that the place where I'm going to draw the top line still parallel to the line that I am drawing right now, that bottom line. So now let's go in and draw that top line for our second brow. As you can see, the brow pretty much almost looks done. I'm just adding a few more strokes to really perfect it and to make sure there are no sparse areas. Now, when I say no sparse areas, that of course doesn't mean that I want them to look black and dark and unnatural. It means that I'm still going to be lighter towards the front of my brow, but not creating like this obvious harsh ombre. So now let's move on to concealer. To do that, I'm going to prime my entire face with this Maybelline primer. And while she's doing that, I also want to note that as you're drawing the hair-like strokes, it does not mean that you need to literally draw hair-like strokes. I think that trying to create a natural brow look and trying to fill in your brows to look fuller and thicker by using one of those brow like markers or brow pens to force the hair like strokes look. I think that can actually make your brows look more unnatural, and just by darkening the skin underneath the hairs of your eyebrow, I think will make them look a lot more effortlessly full. So moving on, let's clean up these brows. I personally don't like to have a process that requires me to trust it. So by the time I clean up my brows, I've already put in lots of effort to make sure that while I'm filling in my brows, that the shape already looks like the shape that I'm going for before I clean it up. I feel like I'm doing my brows right and truly achieving a natural look when I feel like I can still confidently and comfortably walk out the house even before I clean up with concealer. As I'm cleaning up my brows, I'm using that MAC palette that I showed you earlier, and I'm switching between NC42, NC40, and NW40 because I have both warm and cool parts of my face because I'm neutral. I'm using those 3 shades, mixing them together to make sure that the concealer matches my skin for whatever part of my skin that I'm trying to add makeup. For instance, I might not use NC42 in the arch of my brow and underneath the front of my brow. Maybe I want to go in with NC40 for the front of my brow and focus on NC42 when cleaning up the tail and the arch, because brown girls, really everybody, we are mixed of a lot of different colors, and if you really want it to look natural, then don't be afraid to use slightly lighter shades here, slightly darker shades there, slightly warmer shades here, till you feel like you can pretty much not even detect the makeup on your skin and can barely see the concealer. Now, I want to pause the video right here and do another little pop quiz. Let's take a look at the brow from this angle. This is my brow from an angle that obviously I cannot see unless I'm looking at myself in a video. So there are some things that I personally would have done differently had I been able to see this angle. So just think about what you think I could have done better, what I could have done worse, to try to train your artistic eye and decide what would make this brow go from looking good to like absolutely incredibly amazing based on what you see and deciding your opinion, or based on any advice that I've shared so far. For me personally, looking at this brow, I think it looks pretty good from this angle, but it's starting to give me a bit of an S curve that I personally don't like. So I want to take it even flatter and even more straight across the top of the brow because it's kind of starting to dip. I think it's doing the same thing in the bottom, which isn't a terribly bad thing because at least that means those lines are parallel and they're dipping together. But if you want something more angular and more sharp, then I would make this change to the top and this change to the bottom. That's something that would come with my concealer step. I think the brows turned out perfectly fine already, but that's just a little something that I would do to make them a bit more clean. And based on information I shared earlier, maybe if you're like me, you want to even move some of that product more towards the front so that yes, they're not blocky, but they're also not so obviously ombre. Here is where I brushed my hairs up again to get them sitting straight up and out, like I showed you in the beginning. And then I'm trimming them down so that they fit the shape that I just drew. I strongly discourage this if it is your first time and you have something important coming up. Now, if you are in a situation where it's okay for you to like look silly for a little bit until they grow back, it really shouldn't take that long to grow back because you just trim them instead of like tweezing or plucking them. But yeah, if you have a job interview or something coming up, or if you're going back to school or something in the next week or so, I do not recommend this. But if you are like, say, on summer vacation from school, I think it's worth a try. It can absolutely make or break your brows. That's why I encourage you to get them professionally cleaned if that's what you're into. If not, and if you're like me and you notice that a couple hairs are too long, this is extremely helpful. Now I'm going back in with the concealer underneath the other brow just to clean it up. Cleaning up my brows, you might notice I also do not use the technique where you connect your brows in the middle and then kind of fix it as you're cleaning up your eyebrows with your concealer. I am not a fan of that technique personally. I think it can look very awkward even after you fix your brows and clean up the part in between your brows because you're trying to force a symmetry that really isn't there and isn't supposed to be there. We all have heard that brows are sisters, not twins. We don't have to force them to look exactly alike. I think that when you adapt your makeup to your natural features, to what is already on your face when you wake up in the morning, is when it looks best, rather than trying to force a symmetry or a perfection that just doesn't exist on your face. For example, Zendaya, Cara Delevingne are both known for having beautiful, even perfect eyebrows, but they wouldn't look right on me. Yes, their eyebrows are perfect, but they're perfect for them. If I were to wear Zendaya's eyebrows, I would look crazy because that's just not natural or harmonic with my face and my facial features. Does that make sense? And just to recap, these are my 3 tips that I would like for you to take away from this video. And then these are the tips that I personally follow that I don't think everyone needs to in order to achieve their best brow. I'm also gonna put my steps that I followed in this video to achieve the brows that you see here. Moving on, the main pieces of advice that I want you to take away from this video are that when you are drawing and cleaning up your brows, use crisp lines to define a sharp and exact and clean shape. Whether it's with the drawing process, the cleanup process, or both, make sure the shape is defined. Anywhere where it's muddy and there isn't a clear differentiation between the concealer and the eyebrow makeup is where you're losing the crispness of your shape and therefore don't have as clean of an eyebrow as you can. I also want you to keep in mind doing your best to keep the lines parallel from the highest point of your arch underneath your brow all the way to the inside of your brow. And that will just up your makeup game tremendously, like, kid you not. And from there, as long as, in my opinion, when you're going for a natural brow look, you're not forcing those hairs and instead just adding more color and darkness to your skin underneath the hairs of your brows, I think you can very easily achieve a natural brow look. I really hope this video was helpful. If not, if so, please let me know in the comments so I know what to do for next time. If you have any further questions, please let me know. And thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you a million times for subscribing, and I hope you have a wonderful, fantastic day.